Hello, One Book Norristown community. My name is Jamila Winder, and I am a proud resident of the Norristown area. And I currently sit on the board of supervisors with East Norton Township. So, really proud to be a part of this project. I will be reading chapter 5 of Lorraine Cary's novel, The Price of a Child. As a reminder of where we left off last week, here is a brief recap of chapter 4. In chapter 4, Mercy, Ginny begins to form impressions of the Quicks as a powerful family, fully capable of keeping them safe. As she begins to differentiate the assorted members, she is drawn to Harriet, a young school teacher who is like her twin brother. Tyree is active in the abolitionist movement. Harriet helps convince Ginny to choose a name to represent her new life. She initially selects the name Mercy Gray, based on a dream of a gray cat and the mercy so many had recently shown her. So now I'll begin chapter 5, Family. Mercy, Della said in the dark intimacy of the carriage on the ride home. She poked out her bottom lip and sighed as if finding words were a burden. It sounds like some kind of made-up name. It is a made-up name, said Zelphia, with a sort of amusement. Oh, Aunt Zill, Harriet breathed. What a thing to say. This woman understands me. We're getting along fine. Better she hear it from us first, said Della. Ginny laughed. I don't mind a made-up name. You need a... Della spread her hands wide in front of her as though she were holding something large, a bigger name, more of a name. That's what comes to me. Harriet said, Mercer. How about that? Remember my teacher, Mrs. Mercer Johnson? She was a dear lady. Mercer. Della repeated the name appreciatively. The new name appreciatively. Mercer suits you. It's elegant, really. Isn't it, Mercer? Ginny humphed gently. Let us welcome the newly baptized, said Beatrice, clapping. Harriet clapped with her. Is that your name now? I'll take it. Tell you the truth, I've been thinking the past hour of inviting Mercer to come speak to our Female Abolition Society, said Harriet. You have an excellent voice, she added. That's kind of you to say. Surely you've been told that before. Willie had liked her voice. So had Pryor. Mercer pulled her arm tighter over Maddie's shoulders. She thought of Pryor's long fingers and how she hated him to touch her breast. Why her breast? That had always been hard, just getting past that part, especially when she was pregnant, or worse yet, nursing. She could wall off from the waist down and make herself not mind so much. Maybe her breasts were too close to her head. She couldn't wall off from the neck down, which is what she tried to do. Why, this thought led her to mind the hotel chambermaid. She didn't know, but she saw the woman's leathery face in her mind's eye, fearful and resistant, backing from the room and apologizing, trying to keep out of trouble. It made Mercer sigh. Not in so many words. Now don't get discouraged now, Della said, patting her hand. Della's clothes and hat made noise in the carriage, and because of her weight, she breathed hard, even when she was resting, which seldom happened. I like my new name, Mercer said. Good, Della said quickly. She had not finished with the business about speaking. What kind of people would she speak to? I just wonder. You deliver your lectures, but you're an educated woman. You're trained to it. Mercer said not wish to speak in public and before men. This would be the Ladies' Anti-Slavery Society, Mother. And what does that mean? Having rivaled herself by talking about Harriet's Quakerish learnings. Della became angry, and the very mention of the Ladies' Society, in which Quaker women figured prominently. Mean, said Zelphia. Before Harriet decided how to answer, they all bled. Della and they are all bear child in pain. Although I expect not so much pain as they say, mine wasn't never so bad. I believe young women are inclined to whine more than they need to do. I don't know, Aunt Zelphia, Harriet said. I've never had a child, but I was there for Blanche having Africana. Now, why doesn't somebody change that child's name? I was there for her birth, and honestly, I thought it would kill Blanche. It did almost kill her. Almost everything almost has. Harriet shared the family's general impatience with Blanche and felt sorry for it, and sorry for Blanche these days. Abby Ann was poised to fly off and play priest's wife. Already she was making it clear that she no longer wanted a Confederate. She'd even signified that she would rather Blanche have ridden in a carriage with another woman. Blanche would be lonely in the Quick House. She had terrible headaches that whole pregnancy, Harriet recalled. Were you here, Aunt Zill? It was dreadful. She'd see little floating specks, she said. Then the pain would move up and down her side. Then what happened? Oh, then she'd violently ill? She's still affected? She's still affected, you know, though not half so much as before. Well then, if she's so fragile, why she keeps sewing those furs? How many times have we told her about that devilish arsenic in them? Zelphia said. I say young women have their health all wrong. Work with things that kill them, and whine and cry about something God meant for them to do. With all respect, Zelphia, Della said to her sister-in-law, I think that women who have an easy time of it with babies can say some terrible things to make other women out to be liars. Women work for us had 8 children, and she used to always say Della mocked her in her high-pitched sing-song. Why, it ain't no harder than your daily constitutional. Idiot, she'd say around women. She'd say it around girls. She'd say it around other women's husbands. Zelphia said, they tell us that black women in the fields work up to the day they deliver and then drop them and keep right going. Well, Mercer said, they lie? Do you like Mercer, honestly? Did it feel as if it suits you, Harriet asked. I like it just fine. Oh, I had a terrible time keeping my babies, Della said. They tried to come too early. I lost the first 2, you know, when I was right about 6 months gone. So from then on, when I started to show, they just put me in bed, and that's where I stayed. That's how I got to stout, but I kept my babies. You was stout before, Della, Zelphia said. Well, I was stout, but when my mother had me, Zelphia said, she tells me she had a ring of bumps right way around her belly. And under the bumps was some awful kind of pain. She said it were like a ring of pain. The bumps or whatever they was disappeared eventually, and she thought no more of them. But lo and behold, Bee was born, and didn't they come back and kill her dead? You know what it was? Death came for her once, and then she got a reprieve. Is that how she saw it, Della said? No, she thought it was me again. She thought it was me killing her. Bee held Harriet's hand and patted it. Well, shall live to be old women, Harry, she cackled, 'cause we don't have to put up with that. Harriet smiled in the dark at her naughty little aunt, now 32, able to read and write Latin, accomplished in anatomy, arithmetic, geography, history, and literature. Harriet Lee Quick Wilson had married for 2 years and widowed 8. She did not want another husband. She did not want children of her own, or pinched little row house, or hot with new to keep the babies warm. Full of coal, gas, windows coated with greasy steam of bacon and cabbage, Harriet could do without. She'd had one husband with his bull neck throw himself onto her and ram and sweat every night, even when she begged him for decency's sake not to. Every night God sent. Every night was like a prison sentence. He was proud of his prowess as he was off his gray eyes and curly brown hair. To whom could she have complained such a thing? And whom did she tell? She'd wondered. It would have been impossible that he would have bragged to no one. How she escaped without a baby, Harriet couldn't tell. But she never wanted another man to suck on any part of her body or dribble tobacco juice into her mouth and down her belly. Thank you, no. Harriet had quite enough marriage, although she was genuinely sorry for Wilson that he had died early from a bad heart. Aside from his carnal obstinacy, he'd been a good man. She kept to herself the mean-spirited suspicions that the voluptuous had contributed to his early demise. So, no more marriage. Harriet loved her schoolhouse with its open windows for ventilation, its neat rows for desks and books, and its cataloged collections, rocks, insects, mammals, and formaldehyde. She took rooms in the house her parents had rented for years to the Beckers. Now Mrs. Becker was widowed and glad of company. Harriet had the late afternoon sun to read by, all alone, nice and quiet. Bea patted Harriet's hand companionably and breathed warm puffs of whiskey breath at her. Of course now, they'll only call you a widow. And that's not bad, but me, I'll be an old maid. You've been an old maid for 20 years, Zelphia said. And if you keep drinking that stuff, and your brother drink, you won't make it to be an older maid. Listen to your sister, Bea, Della said. If you want to make it to her age, we got to make it to be like Zelphia. Zelphia's going to live forever, Bea said, with a pout in her voice. And who'd want that? No one lives forever, Zelphia said. You see, Del? Bea answered, so I shan't worry about it. But Harriet, Della said, pulling the conversation away from Zelphia and Bea, where was it you were thinking of inviting Mercer? I do like the name Mercer. Where to? Mercer looked up when she heard her new name. She'd been remembering how much she bled after she had Benjamin and how weak she was. She remembered that tiredness would not lift as it had the first and second times. For months, she took to sitting down every chance she could, even to chop an onion. Yes, I said that, Harriet said, but it was thoughtless of me. Mercer's likely going to move on tomorrow. So Sharkey had said he told them that he thought it's safer for Mercer to spend the night with them and then head north the next day. She was worried about Pryor sending private bounty hunters after her. So Sharkey himself would take her to New York, where he'd see to it that she and the children go on the train cars to Boston. He'd wire friends of their committee to meet her. She might as well stay in Boston. It would be harder for her kidnappers and slave catchers to find her there. If they were looking, he figured, or she might go elsewhere in New England or to Canada. With these words in her thoughts, Mercer Gray tucked her children and herself into B's four-poster bed. And after a brisk debate, the Quick family had decided against putting them in the shed kitchen or their Waverly Street house because Sally could no longer be trusted not to brag. And when Manny had suggested the basement of their own home, Tyree argued against it hotly on account of rats. Bea volunteered to keep them in her house for the night. She gave them her own bed on the understanding that it was only temporary. It took some effort to get to sleep after all. Beatrice's house had fleas. I didn't mention them, did I? She asked. Course you didn't, said Zelphia brusquely. You all had better brush off your ankles and rustle your dresses. Rustle them hard till they snap. Snap them. Because if you don't, it's misery. And now I'm giving you my bed. So whatever you do, please, please, please wash your feet before you get in it, Bea added. The fleas came from the dogs, who were in the backyard barking at the newcomers when they arrived. Their job was to keep out rats. Old Standby, Bea explained, was an excellent ratter. Simple Simon, the new dog, was simple and good mostly for attracting fleas. Bea's bed was soft and wide. She had linen sheets and feather pillows with embroidered cases on them. The whole thing smelled faintly of lavender and hair oil, like the woman herself. Mercer made sure that she and the children washed well before getting into bed. Maddie, who had slept on the ride home, cried about washing. Mercer bathed him anyway, vowing that she did not want to be remembered as a mud stain and patch of stink on little Bea's bedclothes. Then she rubbed her hands up and down the children's legs before they jumped in and did the same for herself. The bed was very soft. They rolled onto another, laughing and rubbing their itchy ankles with the soles of their feet. Then, with Maddie in the middle, they fell asleep, all of them instantly. Mercer was dreaming straightforward dreams about the events of the day when Maddie woke her with his heaving. She reached under the bed for a chamber pot she knew would be there and shoved it under her son's chin. As soon as the first episode subsided, Mercer collected Maddie in her arms to take her downstairs and outside. Etta came behind Mercer with the chamber pot, unable to keep from catching her breath in her throat each time one of them tripped or bumped in the dark. The staircase turned a corner in the tiny row house. Each tread gave barely enough room for their bent feet. The fleas bit freely. Try as they might to keep quiet, they woke the household. Bea bustled down sleepily behind them, demanding to know what was happening. The boarders came to the top of the stairs, calling. What is it? Zelphia stood in the entrance to the front door like a haunt. As Etta stepped into the backyard, Standby let out a growl and leapt at her. Etta screamed. Mercer swung Maddie over her one shoulder and used her free hand to grab at the door and pull it closed. The dog's head caught between the door and its jab. The dog writhed and growled and whined. Oh shit, Mercer muttered. Bea caught up to them. Her curls were gone. Gray fuzz like mold covered her head. What are you doing to old Standby? Her voice accused and blamed. Jesus, have mercy. You killed my dog. That dog was trying to kill my child. Oh, move over, Bea said. As she passed Mercer, smelled liquor. It seemed to be coming from the top of her bald head. She moved unsteadily. Mercer felt new flea bites. She cursed again. Stand by, Bea shouted, and grabbed the door. Mercer let go of the door. Bea dropped out onto the dog and held him tight around the neck. Stop it, she screamed. You stop that. The dog shut up. Etta whimpered and sniveled in the sudden quiet. Maddie burped and choked loudly. In the melee he had vomited on, Mercer's shoulder and down her back. Outside, the night had turned cool. Above the alley, blurry stars shone just behind the low-hanging mist. Bay passed Mercer a small wash tub and sent the boarders up the alley to fetch water in an old leather fire bucket. This that hung on the hook in the shed kitchen. Here, give him this. They made Matty gargle with salt water. He was moaning and hot. He's burning up, Mercy whispered to no one in particular. Her voice was swallowed by the mist. He's burning up. Zelphia hoisted her nightdress and tucked it into the tops of her boots. She kept by her bed. She walked to them and put her hands on the back of Maddie's neck. You better sponge him down. With what? Cool water right here. Bay, you got a rag handy? Maybe I do. Do better just to wrap him up and let him sweat, Mercer said. Zelphia ignored her and slapped at her ankles. The smell of the turpentine wafted from her. It made Mercer remember home. Sue swore by turpentine. When Mercer gave birth, Sue had mixed it with lard and smeared it onto her with a rag to keep her from tearing. They used it after beatings, too. Bay answered dizzily, as if she hadn't heard Mercer, that she had most anything they could think of in the shed kitchen. I believe he'll be all right if I just wrap him up and get him the night air, Mercer said again, stomping her feet. Bay handed a rag to Zelphia, who handed it to Mercer. The boy is burning up, she said. Cool him down, I tell you. Cold water had to be flirting with death. Mercer said again that she figured Matty would be better in the morning, now that he cleaned himself out. Etta stood beside Mercer, bouncing nervously on the balls of her feet. Mercer pursed her lips and frowned at her daughter through the darkness until she stilled herself. Aw, come on, child, Zelphia said into Mercer's ear. The old woman's voice was almost as low as a man's. She sounded impatient. Come on, the boy's burning up. You've been living in a shack all your life, just like I used to. You think you know everything there is to know. Just do like you're told. Ma'am, Mercer said through her teeth, I've been given a lot of orders in my life. You understand what I'm saying? Uh-huh. But this here is your son. His life could depend on whether or not you know when to listen. This is what I do, you see. I nurse people, you know. You know that. Mercer felt hemmed in. The rows of the brick houses with their crazy, tilted, lean-to shed and backyard shacks cut off the low slung sky. She felt hemmed in her jittery daughter and this frantic freedom and dogs and fleas. By little bees gawking boarders and her liquor breath, she felt hemmed in by Zelphia's strange medicine and death-succumbing old voice. It began to rain. Mercer dipped the rag into the leather bucket of water. She'd never seen a leather bucket before. It gave a slow rock as the water sloshed. Zelphia took the rag from Mercer's hand. Hold like this. Mercer held with one arm around his back and one under his buttocks. His body stretched along hers, and his skin burned through Bay's thin cotton gown. She felt the heat of her son's body and the cold slap of the water between them. Matty moaned, and Mercer played that she was doing right. Raindrops plopped on their faces and on the ground. In half an hour, Matty had cooled down. Mercer was soaked and shivering. It took all her strength to carry him back up the windy staircase, wrap him in a piece of sheet, and lay him in bed again next to Etta. She took off her nightdress, soaked with water and vomit. Bay gave her another threadbare gown. She put it on, brushed her legs, and lay down. Too tired to sleep, she was listening as her children scratched their ankles. She heard Maddie's rag breathing and felt Etta's twitch in her sleep like a puppy. Rain thudded on the flat of the roof. She wondered when Maddie would be well enough to travel and whether she'd be able to wait until he was. She wondered about Boston and Canada and New England. How could she tell which place would be better when she knew nothing about any of them? She wondered what old Pryor would do. Once he got to where he was going, she wondered about the slave catchers and kidnappers and how they could find people and how a body could hide from them. Tyree Quick came into her mind too. Mercer watched him laughing and throwing the ball to the children. In her mind's eyes, she marveled again at the wholeness of him. Eyes, skin, fingers, thumbs, teeth. The man wasn't missing anything. He wasn't pockmarked. Her mind rushed to admire him, whole and free, not free from or half free or on loan, but truly free. His freedom let her admire him without reserve, without calculating in the back of her mind, and with shame how much profit his strength would provide for someone else, or how many of his master's problems his agile brain would solve. She thought of Teresa's wife, Blanche, who had stayed the better part of the afternoon with the vain woman the minister was courting. She could see the two of them sitting under the tree with their matching bonnets and bangs and their skirts spread around. Mercer felt mean towards them. She probed the meanness as she would a bad spot in her tooth with her tongue to find where it hurt. They looked so comfortable. That's what stuck in her craw. So cocksure that their men would protect them, that their dead would rest in peace, that they'd have sweet lemonade to quench their thirst, and that their children would have rubber balls to throw. They looked like freedom too, and instead of admiring them, she resented them for it. The rain stopped. An ivory haze of moonlight seeped into the room and shone on Bay's dark furniture and white linen. Mercer turned her new name in her mind like fresh minted money. Always wanted to be free. Well, she said it, and sold her own baby boy down the river with a mother's tongue. Now she understood the desire and what it took to let it loose, big like the sky, and liable to strike lightning. But lightning struck any time, and the cost of freedom was no dearer than the cost of bondage could be. Now you free. Tough titty, she told herself, gotta suck it. Cats in the alley began to yowl. Some poor, cold. Mercer thought that she was trying to keep old Tom from giving her a litter she couldn't keep alive. The yowling went on and on and on, like a baby crying from far away. Mercer prayed for Benjamin. Light like a garment. Sue would say it again and again. Just that phrase, picked up from her prayer meetings, held at the farm 5 miles away. In her mind, Mercer wrapped her son in a soft white coverlet that gave off a glow like moonbeams. God, keep us while we are absent, one from another. There was no way to say it. She said it alone. The time will come, Mercer told herself, when Susie will teach Benjamin his prayers, and he will lie on his cot and say them into the dark. She prayed the words with them, and it came to her like inspiration. She'd pray somehow to get him back. Pryor would try to get her back too. Mercer knew it. He would pity himself that he'd be so ill-used. He would remind himself of everything he had ever given her. every yard of fabric, every strip of bacon, every scrap of linen. And after he'd finish, he'd roll his sari up into an angry ball and hurl it at her. What a nice man he'd been. What a decent fellow. Could have done her every which away and slapped her for crying, but he never did. That's what he'd think. He'd call her an ungrateful black wretch, whispering through his teeth while he was alone, while he shaved or used the commode or took his comfort in his own cup fist at night. She, who had never stayed in his bed longer than a quarter of an hour, with her head wrapped and towels under her to make sure she leave nothing depart laden with his sweet and slime and seed, she, the newly named Miss Mercer Gray, she would linger in his head day and night. He would come after her surely, surely. She crossed her arms over her breast and burrowed into the bedclothes. This new freedom was a shaky proposition, and it had cost her her son. She would never go back. If Pryor wanted to come after her, well, let him. They did not leave the next day or the day after. It was dangerous to stay in Philadelphia. But Mercer could not take her unwell child on the road. Maddie returned to health only slowly. At Mercer's insistence, they moved out of Bee's bedroom onto the pallets in the shed. Tyree built them wood platforms out of crates to put the pallets on. He got the crates from a tobacconist. They advertise a plug tobacco called Wedding Cake, made by this company in Richmond, Virginia. As he was constructing the platform, Tyree asked Mercer whether she wanted Virginia turned down. "Leave it up, please," she said. "I want to see it every day that I ain't there." Bay made Maddie a drink, sweet green syrup mixed with water. She brought it to him in a ceramic cup in the shape of an elephant and with a quill to sip through. Its trunk formed the handle. She told him about a real elephant he could go see for a quarter on Market Street, and that she'd take him when he got well. Maddie asked each day if the elephant was still in the Market Street, as if he knew where Market Street was. When he worried about the price of the ticket, Beatrice put a quarter under his pillow and told him that it had come from the fairies. Maddie liked to hold his coin in his hand or in his mouth. "Take that out of your mouth," Mercer told him. "Money is filthy. This money," he said, grinning, "is clean." Harriet took to visiting each afternoon with offerings from a secondhand store called the Clothing Seller and invitations from Mercer to accompany her to lectures and meetings she attended in the evenings. She brought a picture book of United States scenery of Etta, and Maddie took to look at the volume of her journal to show Mercer. In it were psalms, scripture passages, and poems by Browning, Macaulay, Wordsworth, and Longfellow. Harriet also pinned articles cut from newspapers or copied in her small oval hand. Mercer turned the pages to take to the sheer mass of it. Pryor collected guns and tiny toy soldiers. The compilation made sense to Mercer. She stopped at one page that caught her eye and asked Harriet to read it to her. Harriet cleared her throat and began in a pleasant, practiced voice. "Be ever gentle with the children God has given you. Watch them constantly, reprove them earnestly, be not in anger. In the forcible language of the scripture, be not bitter against them. Yes, they are good boys. I once heard a kind father say, I talk to them pretty much, but I do not like to beat my children. The world will beat them enough." It was a beautiful thought, though not eloquently expressed. Yes, there is not one child in the circle around your table, healthful, happy as they look now, on whose head, if long spared, the storm will not beat. Adversity may wither them, sickness fade, and a cold world frown on them. But amid all, let memory carry them back to home where the law of kindness reigned. I have put the article in a frame and hung it on the wall in our schoolroom, Harriet said, and I'm afraid more than one paragraph has taken me to task for it. I'm sure they has. It makes you ashamed. What it say? The world will beat them enough. We always say we're getting them ready. Read the last part again, please. But amid it all, let memory carry them back to a home. Let memory carry them back to a home where the law of kindness reigned. Reigned meaning ruled, Harriet said. Where the law of kindness reigned. The parents tell me in so many words, the school mistresses without children of their own ought to confine their lessons to children. Mercer smiled. My father never hit me. They said I was spoiled because he never hit me. Just this minute is the first time I ever heard anybody say different. What else you have in there? Harriet turned to the back of the journal where she'd written stories for children at her school. She wrote them herself so that her pupils would have stories to read about other colored youngsters. One story featured Negro mercenaries with two sons who go to Africa and convert people to Christianity. The boys make friends, and the friends take them to see a herd of elephants. Elephants, cried Maddie, a hoarse voice from his bed, like the elephants on Market Street. Harriet called back to the shed from where they sat in the kitchen, just like the one on Market Street, only bigger. Don't strain. I dictate these to the children, Harriet continued. Then I have them draw pictures about the story and take them home and read them to their parents. I'll give Etta one of the girls' papers to copy, if you don't mind. Do you think she'd like that? Etta appeared in the doorway, grinning and looking adoringly at Harriet. Yes, ma'am. Speak up, Mercer said. She took care to say it gently. The article had chastened her. It made her want to defend herself to the writer of the article. She knew good and why parents at Harriet's school did not like to have the thing framed and beaming down on them. It made you want to shout at it. I'm doing my level best. What else can you ask of me? Harriet had brought something else too, a Wilson's premiere for Mercy to study. Only if you like, of course. But I see how you taught yourself so far. Nah, I didn't teach myself, but I would like to work, since we are here if you're willing. Excellent. Harriet's homely face fell into happy lines. Mercer supposed that it was how she looked at the school when the children pleased her. Harriet pulled a copybook from her leather pouch. Here's one to start. She took the pencil from the bag and wrote on the first pages verbs, irregular, copy 15 times each. To be, I am, you are, he, she, it is, we are, you are, they are. First lesson, and oh, she pulled a matching copybook and a piece of paper out of her pouch. Etta, here's a copybook for you. And that story I told you about, this was written by a very nice girl in our class named Sarah. I hope to bring Afrikaans paper for you, but it contained 4 errors, and that's no way to begin. Besides, Afrikaans hand is terribly sloppy. Now, don't mind that you won't understand it all. Just copy and copy carefully. Guess you've got us occupied now, Miss Harriet, Mercer remarked. Harriet flushed a smile. Yes, I see you are mocking me just the littlest bit. And I don't care. Work, write, read. She laughed out loud. New students and fugitives. There's nothing I like better. Etta, you must study hard and write me beautiful letters one day from wherever you go so I can put them into my stories. Etta squirmed happily and figured her copybook. As Harriet expected, the two began their work within minutes after she left. Harriet came the next afternoon and the next, bringing more lessons and another invitation, this one to a lecture she was giving on anatomy in the Quicks parlor. Mercer accepted. Bea sent one of her boarders over early to help clean, and Mercer went with her. They beat the carpets, dusted and polished the piano, mahogany sideboard, card tables, and mirrors. They brought wooden folding chairs from the basement, dusted them, and set them in rows in the parlor and back into the dining room. The audience came to the house on Pine Street promptly at 7 and consisted of colored people of quality, as they called themselves, mostly men with a few women, mostly women and a few men. They were well dressed, perfumed. Mercer worked alongside Della, and no one caught anything except that Della had hired her to help. When she brought a chair in from the kitchen and sat in the back of the room, only a couple people bothered to turn their heads. Harriet's musical voice practically sang the song. Who knew how much the audience grasped of how many of them merely sat back admiring the learning that one of their own had achieved? Crowded with so many bodies, Della's prim parlor warmed considerably. The audience fanned themselves and seemed not to mind. Harriet, who cared for their children by day, who led up their minds through nature to nature's God, was leading grown minds this evening through the science of anatomy. Why, they would gladly have sat sweating and fanning and listening to her pronounce these unpronounceable words till sunrise. Throughout Harriet's talk, Della baked lemon cakes in the kitchen while Abby Ann pressed into service as a helper. The cakes had been ordered for a ball, but Della made extra. When Harriet finished, she sent Africana and Etta into the dining room with trays of little cakes and put Abby Ann at the end of the table to pour tea. Then Della herself swept in the collection compliments on her daughters and her home. Her 18th century English soup tureen in the shape of the red hen, brought out specifically for the evening and perched on the buffet, and her cakes. She promised faithfully to patch each comment on to Manny, who had not come downstairs, she said, because he still didn't feel up to it. They knew about his seizures and made sympathetic noises. A handful of people refused to leave. They stood about the dining room table, munching and sipping and talking. Having found that Harriet could not be stumped by their questions, 3 men who considered themselves science-minded now stood in a clump, arguing with a 4th who claimed that according to Lamerick's theories, Black people who lived in the North would eventually lose their color because their dark skin gave no biological advantage in northern climates, and certainly, as any fool could see, no economic advantage either. A group of 5 women stood on the other side of the room, gossiping quietly. Well, gentlemen, Tyree said, I thoroughly expect to stay Black until I die. He puts his arms out as if to direct the men to the table where they'd lay their hats. But if I see any folks starting to turn, I'll let you know. Della walked the ladies to the door. When he heard the door closed, Manny called Tyree to help them downstairs. What do? Invite every Sambo and soap fat alley? I heard Tyree. Had to beat him up out the door? Harry, you got the riffraff this time. You know not one of them had any ideas what you were saying. Mercer could not help laughing. No, look, Kit, Manny said. None of them ain't quality. Who's quality, Daddy? I'm quality, that's quality. Manny poked his chest with his thumb and turned a frown on the room resting on Mercer. They looked like they was listening, Mr. Quick. Let me tell you. All they did tonight was keep up appearances. Dressed up and came out and sat there with their faces screw up like they thickenin'. That's all. How many did you have? I'ma say 3 dozen, Della answered. She did give an excellent talk, Father. Everyone said so. 36 people, more or less. Why didn't someone count? Don't you count, Harriet? Or can't the school mistress count and talk at the same time? There was 32 people who came, Mercer said. The Quicks turned to Mercer and said, You counted, Della asked. I didn't think much about it. 32, same as Harriet's age. Manny said this to Mercer as if because she had counted, she'd be interested as he was in the coincidence. Well, he asked Harriet, did any of them sign up? New students for you. Paying students? No. Did they eat up the cakes for the Longins ball? No. Good. They do warm up the house, though. Ought to have them all back for another lecture in January. Geography, maybe. So, Daddy, Harriet said, I see you're happy to have your house empty of guests. Her voice sounded tired. I hate a house full of strange Negroes. You know that. He looked at Mercer. What made you count? She shrugged. Don't know, sir. You should take her on a tour, he said. Dress her up like a lady. Nobody'll know the difference. Harriet pressed her lips. Thank you, she said to Mercer, for not taking offense. Mercer's mouth slipped into its half smile. No, ma'am, least Mr. Quick thinks I could pass off as a lady. He must be talking to me. Tyree laughed. Take her on a tour, Manny said. Let her see what real quality looks like. Not these pompous old Negroes sitting around in my parlor like a bunch of crows on a chimney. When we were small, Tyree explained, my father used to take us around the city, showing us all the colored businesses. He would walk up and down the street after street, telling us what each man did and how they started and what they owned now. And he always ended up on Broad Street to show us the lumber yard of Mr. Stephen Smith, the richest Negro in America. We should take Mercer, Harriet said to Tyree. Perhaps she'll make it through this time. What do you mean, make it through? Asked Abby Ann. Without getting smacked, Harriet said. Daddy would be telling us this one began with nothing, or how that one brought out of slavery by paying his master $1 a week for 10 years. And ended up buying the master's shop 20 years later. And Ronald and Tyree would giggle or fight. And then Daddy would box their ears. I'd show you a lumberyard built by a colored man, a man who owned 50 brick houses, and one you would stick your foot out to trip the other, Manny sighed. Mr. Smith was a generous to charitable causes for other people, Harriet said, meaningfully to her father. When I finally met him, Tyree said, I'm afraid I was disappointed he didn't look so very rich. Well, and how would rich appear to us, eh? Asked Harriet. The man moved lumber on the rails, I tell you, Manny said. He was standing next to the shelves he built into the wall. Into the parlor, to display his ships in the bottle. Oh, get him a rag, he said. Mercer did not know whom he was talking to until Della shuffled into the kitchen and back again to get a rag for her husband. He gave generously to our organizations, Harriet said. Manny called Mercer to see the ships as he had polished them. He told her the number of sails and the height of the mast and the other numerical details she did not understand and could not remember. The ships themselves appeared perfect. to her, and yet she had no interest in them, whatever. Besides, she did not like collections of things, although she have been hard pressed to say why. Oh, he was the most boring little man, Della said, with those cheap spectacles. And he was just losing his hair in tufts. Yep, Tyree said, laughing. Money will not buy you hair. It bought Aunt Bee some hair, said Abby Ann. Be still, Della said. Well, Tyree asked, we fixed him, didn't we? That'll teach him to be so black and so rich. So having heard the grim history, Miss Gray, would you like to go outside Smith's mansion and kick shins with us so that you too can come home and say unkind things about our betters? The sudden seriousness Mercer turned from the boats in their bottles and said, I put my education in your hands. Now I gotta go back and sit with Maddie. Blanche had stayed upstairs that night, saying she was indisposed, but at Harriet's urging, she and Abby Ann came to call for Mercer at Bee's the next day. They walked around the block to the front door rather to go through the alley to avoid old Standby and Simple Simon. It was a short visit. When Mercer asked after Ephraim, Blanche clapped her hands. We haven't invited you to church, have we? She asked. Zilphia snorted. You must come, Blanche became whining and willful. It's St. Thomas African Episcopal Church. I was raised Catholic, but, she sighed, Mother Dell won't have it. You know, and Daddy Quick is Episcopalian. Or he was, at least. And that's where they've agreed on. So I go. Her voice trailed off. And Ephraim is a priest in training there, Abby Ann said. Well, he's a deacon, actually. He'll be ordained into the priesthood, please God, next year. I'll come. Thank you for asking me. Oh, you'll love it, Blanche insisted. St. Thomas was started by a slave. Didn't Harriet tell you that? Absolute Jones. It took him something like 15 years to earn himself out. And then he stayed working for the same man for wages. He said the colored people had to throw off that servile fear, that habit of oppression and bondage trained us up in. Again, Blanche smiled winningly. This will be an excellent place for you to bring your spirit. Mercer felt irritable after they left. She didn't need Yella 1 and Yella 2 lecturing about shaking off servile fear, but she'd go to church anyway. The following Sunday, Mercer found herself sitting at the end of the Quicks pew in St. Thomas African Episcopalian Church. A young man who carried a gold cross walked down the aisle first. Then came another, the one swinging incense in a metal lattice box. The box hung at the end of a long chain, and the young man swung it in wide arcs on either side of his body. Though the smoke, he was as beautiful as an angel and as worldly as a dancer. The smoke rose in swirls to the ceilings and burned the insides of her nostrils. It smelled hot and dry and rich. Here in church where Mercy had expected her soul to spring to life, her body came alive instead. She wanted to be made love to and held. With the feeling came tears and an acid wash, only as much as she could bear, into the raw places inside her, the places of shame and rage. Behind the young men came younger boys, very serious as they were marching at the head of an army, strutting and bouncing under the weight of their banners, ready to make themselves men. Then followed the choir singing elaborate and beautiful music about joy, and Ephraim wearing a white robe trimmed in green, and behind him similarly robed, but much older, the priest. Tears trailed down Mercer's cheeks. She did not sob or tremble, but the tears ran freely. And she could no more stop them than she could stop the procession down the center of the church. The priest, a small grandfatherly man with white hair to his shoulders, told them in a resonant voice, "Stand fast in the liberty wherein Christ has made us free." Mercer repeated that phrase. She would write it down in her copybook. When the congregation went forward for communion, Blanche told Mercer not to take the bread and wine since she hadn't been baptized, but to cross her hands over her chest to receive a blessing. She did. The minister looked compassionately at her red eyes and touched her head with cool fingers. At the end of the service, the organist played more of his complicated music. Parishioners stood to leave or else knelt in low benches in front of them. Blanche knelt, not wanting to speak to anyone. Mercer knelt beside her and closed her eyes. When she opened them, acolytes were snuffing the tail candles. A woman dressed in well-made but threadbare clothing walked to the high altar after some bowing and curtsying, followed by two boys that favored her. Mercer assumed that they were her grandchildren. The woman handed each of them an ornament in turn from the altar. She bowed to them, and they bowed in return. They were impossibly well behaved and beautiful, with wide-eyed, fat cheeks, and clear faces. Those people took care of their own. Mercer felt pride and envy. Next to Mercer, Blanche stayed on her knees. She asked Jesus to help her embrace the suffering of her life. She wanted to embrace the exhaustion of her headaches because she knew they would bring her closer to him. In her mind, she protested herself on the cold floor, and in her mind, he smiled at the sacrifice. After that, Mercer agreed more often to travel abroad the city with her adopted family. They called her Cousin Mercer. During the day, she nursed Maddie and cleaned for a little baby. Harriet began taking Etta to school with her as an assistant. She assigned her niece, African, the task of visiting Maddie each day and reading him a story to him. And in the evening, she took Mercer out to learn abolition. They attended one of the meetings after another, sometimes alone, often with other family members. Most of the speakers were white, occasionally accompanied by a Negro, who came on stage to display scars or on his back or to testify of the evils of slavery. Only once did a former slave take the podium to give a talk, and that was not at one of the halls, but in African Methodist Episcopal Church. The speakers looked nearly broken. He spoke a flat voice that seemed separate from what he said. They're a game that some of the overseers liked us to play, and it went this way. When a slave got himself caught in the wrong, they would call the other slaves together and give everyone a green switch, and cause them to stand in a circle. The one what's in trouble, he stand in the middle. Then they give him the command to start with a whooping. That's the game. That's the game. As he spoke, he waved in the air. That's a game. As he spoke, nubby hand. Now, can you find people tell me what's a whooping? The colored people of quality shook their heads together. They talked back to him to give them their earnest sympathy. "My Lord," one woman shouted, "Dear Jesus, since I've been up north, I heard people talk about what would have done if they'd been a slave. But I'm going to tell you this one thing. I don't care who is or how old you big and strong you think you is, huh? Slavery could break anybody." Mercer left the slavery talk feeling anxious and weary. She suddenly feared that Pryor might be waiting for her at the bottom of the steps. She could see him in his two-tier gray winter cloak he had once flung. She could still remember the weight of it. She'd never imagined a wrap so warm. No wonder Negroes were always sick. No wonder that man in the pulpit looked the 20 years older than he was. You ever been beat? Mercer asked. She wanted to smack herself. I don't see what that has to do with it. If you had been beat, you try not to get beat again. That's all. Mercer found herself remembering a Sunday evening when Lily was young and strong, before the fight in her hand had turned inwardly. Lily had made cornbread and traded some of it, the stolen coffee and sugar from the Prior's driver. The cornbread had crusted on the bottom and the coffee was sweet. Lily's laughter filled the ugly room. When they'd finished laughing, they chewed the crunchy crust of the cornbread and drank the sweet coffee and sat up most of the night watching the stars and the moon move actions across the sky. 2 stars that night shot down through the sky, trailing icy blue tails, and Lily absently told her the story of the gingerbread man. Why'd he run away? I don't know. Maybe the people beat him. Maybe he was wicked. Tyree watched Mercer's face. Are you tired of meetings yet? He asked. You must tell us. I'd hate for you to go to bed each night praying to God to deliver you from us. No, sir, she said. Good, he said. In that case, I think Uncle Sharky and I'll take you to one of the Africa meetings, as Uncle calls them. You know you don't have to go to Africa, Blanche said. No, I don't, Blanche. You know where I'm thinking about, Canada. Yes, Canada. But the Africa immigration men say sensible things that few other Negroes are willing to speak about. Besides, Silver's giving a talk soon. Tyree continued, they say that the butterflies in Africa fly in such numbers that they turn the sky to pink. Pink, Mercer asked. The idea made her laugh. Yes, pink, like a rose. Mercer laughed harder. I don't know why those crazy old butterflies just hit me funny. Well, Mercer, it's raining, and we are all standing here in the rain getting our feet wet. Blanche sounded angry. Mercer felt like a naughty child. I'm sorry. And next to the alleyway to boot. Blanche's irritated whisper caused the others to look into the alley. Standing at the end of the slanting lamplight from the curb stood a black man holding an umbrella and propping up an older man who was wobbling and urinating onto both feet. Tyree sighed. Makes those pink butterflies sound appealing, doesn't it? They took Mercer to Bee's and then went home. Sharky was waiting for them in the kitchen. Where's Mercer? He asked. We've just taken her to Aunt Bee's, Tyree said. What's wrong? Well, perhaps it's better that I tell you first. Have they put out an advertisement? Tyree asked. He had not read the paper all day, nor had he gone to the post office. No, actually, it's worse than that. I think they've arrested Still and the Porters for assault and battery. No one assaulted him. They touched his arm. They held him. And riot? It was most orderly transaction I've ever seen. Riot, all 6 of them, Still posted bond, of course, in all 3 of them. This means 2 men in jail. The Vigilance Committee, I believe, will find funds to give their families to post bond for them. And what about the Williamsons? Or are they only arresting Africans? To the contrary, because Williamson's is a white man, and because her owners figure that a white man must be in control, you see, he charged Williamson for larceny. They served the papers, then he was out of town on business, and his father, you know his father, don't you? Brought them round to Still and told him Passmore's gone to Harrisburg. Thee had been attended to it. So Still has the anti-slavery lawyer go to court and tell the judge the same thing. Then Williamson comes to the house, goes to the court the next day, and it is told to produce Mercer. He can't do that, of course. Doesn't know where she is. So the judge puts Williamson in prison too for contempt of court. But if he doesn't know where she is, how can he produce her? That's what the lawyer said. What was the answer? I suppose the judge figures he's lying.